She slammed the iPad down and shoved a document toward me. "We're done with you making everything about yourself," my mom said, eyes hard. My 17-year-old brother and 15-year-old sister stood behind her like judges, arms crossed and faces unreadable. I stared at the words on the screen for a second, feeling the weight of 9 years of doing other people's work pressing down and then somehow lifting at the same time. The paper said I was only responsible for sibling-level tasks, no more mothering, and for the first time in a long time I felt permission to be just a kid. I signed it with a smile and left the house feeling oddly light, convinced I was finally allowed to be a kid again. I remember walking down the block like I was lighter than air, like I had dropped a backpack full of bricks. I stopped at the coffee shop and ordered pancakes, sat in the sun, and let myself eat without thinking about school forms, laundry, or who had to be at piano practice. I even bought one of those silly ice rollers I had seen online and rolled it over my face in the bathroom, laughing at how ridiculous and small the whole thing felt. For the first time in forever, I let myself be a teenager who could make dumb purchases and cancel 3 alarms without wondering if the bills would get paid. But the house didn't change when I did. The next morning my brother slept through a major exam because no one shoved him out of bed. The alarm on his phone blinked ignored while he snored. My sister showed up at school wearing the same stained dress she'd worn the day before, and she sat through class with the embroidery thread I used to replace missing buttons in my pocket because nobody had taught her how to fix anything. At home, the fridge went from sparse to empty faster than I thought possible. Mold started showing its small, gross flags in containers nobody bothered to throw out. I got a text from a teacher saying my sister looked unkempt at her recital and that people were talking. My stomach dropped, because the lightness I felt walked right into chaos that I had been holding back. I tried to enjoy my freedom, I really did. I went to a movie and laughed louder than usual, sitting in the dark and feeling like I wasn't responsible for everyone's survival. But the guilt kept showing up at odd times like a knot under my ribs. When my brother asked me on my way out for deodorant, I showed him the agreement I'd signed. He shrugged and called me dramatic. My sister avoided my eyes. They celebrated my signing like I'd abandoned a job they never deserved. The house began to smell like neglect in a way that made my skin crawl every time I walked past the doorway. I texted my friend to brag, and then admitted I was terrified I had made a terrible, irreversible mistake. The recital was the thing that really broke me. I sat in the audience, watching my sister walk on stage in the same faded dress, shoulders hunched like she wanted to disappear. Parents leaned toward each other and whispered. My chest ached so hard I thought I'd cough up a part of my childhood. I stood up during intermission, walked backstage, and explained to the teacher with a fake laugh that we'd reorganized family duties and that my mother had made me sign a contract preventing me from mothering them anymore. You could see the air go out of my mother's face like someone had knocked a breath from her. My sister ran out crying, and the whispers turned into something louder and meaner. By the time we got home, the house looked worse than usual. Dirty dishes piled like a small art installation of neglect, trash bags swollen in corners, and the smell of something indefinable that made me close my mouth to stop tasting it. I went to take out the trash and the bag had holes and something that used to be dinner crawled away. I took pictures on my phone because my brain, which had been doing everything for years, now felt like it needed proof. I didn't know then that those pictures would be the evidence that would change everything. But I started taking them because I wanted someone to see what had been happening for so long. That night I slept in my friend's spare room, feeling guilty and oddly proud at the same time. I was proud because I had stood up for myself and taken a step toward having a life of my own. I was guilty because the house had folded so quickly without me that my siblings were hurt and my mother looked like someone who had finally been caught. I told myself I hadn't abandoned them, that I had set a boundary, but the line between self-preservation and desertion blurred into a gray I couldn't parse. I knew something had shifted, and that, whether right or wrong, I couldn't unsign that paper or unsend those choices. The rest of that week would prove far messier than the moment I felt freedom, and I would learn that keeping myself alive sometimes meant breaking the people who had relied on me. I treated myself to a breakfast latte and an ice roller on Monday, sitting at a corner table and feeling like a person for maybe the first time in years. I sipped slow and rolled that stupid ice thing over my face until my cheeks went numb, and for a few minutes I forgot about the house. For a few minutes I let my body relax the way other kids my age did without a second thought. But every time I blinked, a little voice in my head reminded me that the house I'd kept running for years was still there, and it didn't understand how to keep itself together without me. By mid-morning my phone buzzed with a text from a teacher. Your brother missed his exam. I felt something cold drop into my gut. I called my brother and he answered like he had been sleeping for days, voice thick and confused. I didn't hear my alarm, he mumbled. I asked why nobody woke him. He shrugged, said he was tired, like that explained everything. I wanted to say so much about hospital forms, rising at dawn, 2-minute cereal, but I didn't. I hung up and stared at my latte until it went lukewarm. At lunch, the school called about my sister. She arrived wearing the same dress she'd worn yesterday, the one with a dark stain down the front. Someone had tried to patch a button with a safety pin. I could hear a teacher's concern through the phone, and the way she said my mother's name sounded like a question about whether an adult was in charge at all. I told the teacher I had been handling things and that we were restructuring. It felt like a weak shield when she asked if my sister had eaten that morning. I kept my voice steady and gave answers that made sense in short pieces, like the words themselves could hold the crumbling edges together. At the coffee shop, I tried to be casual when my phone rang and showed my mother's name. She sounded shaken on the line, not angry like before. "They're written me up," she said. "They marked me late 3 times this week." Her voice was small, the kind of voice you get when someone points out something you have been hiding for years. I told her to go to work to talk to HR to explain. She started asking for help, then hung up when I didn't give her the kind of reassurance she wanted. The conversation felt like holding a hot coal. I wanted to drop it, but didn't want to burn anyone either. I watched their chaos like a slow-motion demonstration of everything I'd been doing for a decade. My brain kept tallying unpaid bills I had been sneaking money into, notes I'd written for nurses' offices, lunches I'd packed, clothes I'd repaired, permission slips I'd forged. The list wasn't neat. It was a long, ugly scribble that my hands had made for 9 years. Each unchecked box at home was a reminder I had been doing adult work for kids and an adult who refused to be one. That afternoon, I went back to the house because I told myself I needed a look, like a manager checking on a building after a long shift. The place smelled wrong, like forgetfulness and old takeout. Dishes crusted hard in the sink, trash bags swollen and pushed into corners, and a puddle underneath the refrigerator like someone had spilled something and then left it to rot. My brother was on the couch with headphones on, like the outside world could be tuned out. My sister was at the table picking at dry cereal, looking bewildered. My mother paced and cried, and then texted my aunt asking for help. Watching them move through the day like broken machinery felt like standing in an archaeological dig of my labor. I packed a small bag that night and left some folded laundry on my sister's bed with a note like an awkward gift. "Buttons are in the back pocket. Call me if you need me." I didn't know if leaving that note was cowardly or a tiny mercy. My hand shook when I wrote it because for years writing down instructions had been a normal thing I did. Handing someone instructions and letting them fail seemed indistinguishable from letting them learn. I forced myself to sleep at a friend's place again, because the house tension felt like something that would pull me under if I stayed. All week things cascaded. My brother started falling behind in class because missing one big test rolled into missed homework and skipped labs. My sister stopped going to choir because she couldn't find clean clothes that fit right, and she cried less in public but more in secret. My mother got in trouble at work, then lied to her manager, then showed up late again because she forgot to set an alarm. Each failure was a small volcanic burst from a system I'd held together by habit. Somewhere in the middle of the storm, I realized how invisible the work had been. Teachers, coaches, and even my siblings took my labor for granted because it had always been there. When I wasn't there, the absence wasn't just a gap, it was a revelation. People started noticing, but noticing didn't fix anything right away. It only exposed how badly things had been running and how much of the daily life had been stitched together by a kid who deserved to not be a seamstress. I kept telling myself the contract I signed was a boundary, but watching the damage unfold made me question whether a boundary could exist without a plan to keep people safe. She walked on stage looking small in that wrinkled, stained dress I used to press and mend, and my chest dropped like someone punched it. Parents started whispering, chairs scraping, and a few kids pointed with the cruel curiosity of a crowd that smells something wrong. I sat in the back trying to act like it didn't hurt, pretending the contract was a good idea and not the thing that let this happen. I had planned to watch and be invisible, but seeing my sister there, shoulders hunched and holding her violin like a shield, pushed me forward. When the teacher came over after the piece and asked, "Is everything okay?" I smiled like I'd practiced and said, "We're restructuring the family. Mom made me sign something. I'm not doing the mom stuff anymore." My voice was too bright, the kind of cheer you use to hide a bruise. The teacher's face folded into a frown, the kind that gets serious fast, and she asked where my sister had changed and if she was all right. I answered in small, clipped sentences, because I didn't want to give anyone the whole history in front of 100 people. My sister slipped away toward the hallway and then into the bathroom without looking back. I saw the way her shoulders sagged like a balloon losing air, and I felt sick. I can still hear the soft noises she made when she thought no one could hear, small, private breaks that cut deeper than shouts. I followed at a distance, knocked on the bathroom door and heard her whisper, "Go away." I left and stood by the row of folding chairs, because I didn't know how to be both her brother and someone who had decided to stop doing the work. A teacher found me after the show and pulled me aside, voice low and sharp. "That's not right," she said. "Kids shouldn't go out like that." I told her I'd been the one handling things all these years and that I'd been pulled back. She looked at me like I was still too young to be the center of a care plan, and then she asked for something practical. Had my sister eaten that day? Did she have anyone at home to help her? Were there safety concerns? I answered honestly because she'd asked the kind of questions I had been dodging for 9 years. Saying it out loud felt like prying open a wound. Her next move was the kind you only see when a system notices a pattern. She called the guidance counselor. I watched the way her face shifted, like a phone call can make things more real. The guidance counselor came backstage minutes later, clipboard in hand and a voice that tried to be calm and steady. She asked if we could talk in her office. I followed because I didn't want to make a scene in the hallway, and because part of me was exhausted from pretending the contract would magically work. In her office, she sat me down and asked questions that dug under the surface. Who cooks dinner? Who pays for school things? Who wakes them up on weekdays? I answered like it was a test I've never been allowed to fail, naming chores I had done since I was 9. I told her I had packed lunches, scheduled doctors, signed permission slips, and that my mother had been more absent than present. I told her the agreement existed because my mother told me to stop mothering. The counselor's pen stopped moving, and she looked up at me with something that felt like both anger and worry. She said, "I need to make some calls," and I could hear the weight of that sentence. It landed in my stomach like a brick. I wanted to say I was fine, that I'd set a boundary, that it was my choice, but the look on her face made it obvious there were bigger stakes. She asked whether my siblings had eaten that day and whether they had clean clothes. I answered, and each question was a spotlight showing how many seams I'd been holding together. The office was quiet except for the low hum of the heater and the unsteady sound of my own breathing. When the guidance counselor picked up the phone to call someone from the school office, I realized this wasn't just a parent-teacher thing anymore. Saying the words aloud, the list of chores, the proof of long-term caregiving, the contract, turned it into a report. My heart hit a steady, loud rhythm as she explained things in professional language I was used to hearing but never used about my own life. I sat there and tried to keep my hands still, to let her do the work I had been doing for years without recognition. Inside me, something shifted again. I had stepped back to survive, but stepping back had started a chain reaction nobody had planned for, and now other people were stepping in with phones and forms and protocols. She finished the call and looked at me with that combination of hard care and tiredness adults get when they're about to do the right thing. "We have to make sure they're safe," she said. The words were calm, but they felt huge, like a train that couldn't be stopped. I swallowed and said, "Okay." I didn't know then how much the next few hours would change everything for us, or how the proof I'd taken on my phone would become the thing that decided whether we stayed together or not. They came within hours, 2 women in plain clothes who said they were from Child Protective Services and asked to come in. I felt my mouth go dry the way it does before I have to speak in front of the whole class, only this time the whole class was my family and the room smelled like old food. The social worker set her bag down and asked for permission to look around. I signed nothing, I just let them walk. I wanted to see it happen with my own eyes, like proof that I hadn't been making things up in my head. She moved through the house with a small camera and a clipboard, taking pictures the way a detective takes evidence. She snapped dishes with green fuzz crusted along the rims and a sink full of soapy hard crumbs. She took a photo of the fridge that had one single plastic container with fuzzy mold forming a white ring. She photographed trash bags split at the seams and a small cloud of something crawling out near the back door. The bathroom got the worst of it. Black mildew along the tile, a shower curtain with a ring of brown, and a towel on the floor stiff with something I didn't want to name. Each click of her camera made the house stop and get judged. She asked to speak with my siblings alone first and then asked if they would talk with her. My sister's voice was thin when she spoke. She said she often felt hungry and that she sometimes wore the same clothes 2 days in a row because laundry never seemed to happen. My brother said he missed school stuff because no one had reminded him, and he mumbled that he didn't know how to cook or change a tire or anything like that. Their answers were short, and every time one of them looked at me I could see shame and confusion and a little bit of relief. Relief maybe because the questions were finally being asked out loud. The social worker sat me down at the kitchen table and pulled out a tablet. Her fingers started tapping and she said, "Tell me what you do here." I looked at her and felt like I had to count off a list I'd practiced in my head my whole life. I told her I'd been waking them up every school day since I was 9, making lunches, packing backpacks, and making sure they had snacks for sports. I told her I paid the electric bill online from the little money I made delivering papers, that I called doctors and scheduled appointments, and that I wrote notes when school needed them. I told her I had signed permission slips when a line needed a signature, and that I sometimes forged a parent's name because I couldn't afford to have them miss a shot or a deadline. I said it slow at first because the words felt heavy, and then faster like water finally let loose. I told her I taught my sister how to wash herself and how to change a pad when she got her period. I told her I helped with math homework nightly so grades wouldn't fall apart and that I fixed buttons and sewed hems so they could go to school without getting stared at. I told her I had answered calls from teachers and coaches, had gone to meetings, and had held the house together when my mother did not. Each item I said seemed to make the social worker's face more serious, like she knew she was seeing the job list for a parent, but it had been the job list of a child. She leaned forward and typed with both hands like she was recording a story she couldn't forget later. I watched the screen as she wrote short phrases and toggled checkboxes. Waking meals, laundry, medical scheduling, school liaison, she read back to me in a voice that was flat with no judgment but heavy with professional concern. I answered yes, yes, and yes again. It felt strange to be read back my own life as if it were something someone else had written down. My mother hovered in the doorway while this was happening, breathless and angry in rotation. She shouted at the social worker that I was lying, that I had always wanted control, that I was being dramatic. The social worker didn't shout back. She asked straightforward questions and kept typing. My mother tried to push past her to show the room was fine, to say it was exaggerated. I watched my mom look smaller as each photo came up on the social worker's tablet. It was like watching someone try to cover a hole with their hand while water pours out anyway. When the social worker asked for documents, I brought the agreement my mother had forced me to sign. I put it on the table and watched the lines of typed words feel ridiculous and cruel at once. She handed me this, I said, and the social worker read the contract slowly. She looked back up with eyes that said she'd seen adults act selfish before. She asked if I'd felt forced to sign. I said I had. She asked if she'd signed or if she had been there when things broke down. I answered each question plainly, like schoolwork. By the time she finished her first walkthrough and the interviews, the sun had started to move toward late afternoon and the house felt too small. The social worker closed her tablet and asked quiet, efficient questions about immediate safety. Where do you sleep? Do you have food tonight? Is there anyone who can come help? I answered truthfully and my voice didn't tremble anymore. I had been living on a thin line for so long that answering straight was something I had learned to do out of necessity. She told us she would need to write up a report and would look into the living conditions and parental capacity. I nodded, and the weight of that sentence sat on the table between us. They told us they were going to take the kids into emergency protective custody, and my stomach felt like I'd been pushed down a flight of stairs. I watched the social workers move with steady, practiced calm while my mother screamed and tried to get between them and our two small suitcases. I stepped forward because I knew what would happen if she could slow them down, and she lunged at the workers with nails and words, pleading for me to say I'd keep helping so they wouldn't have to go. I stood there and felt like a kid pretending to be an adult, and then I remembered the paper on my phone with her typed command. I said aloud, she made me sign an agreement. I'm not supposed to be the mom anymore. She grabbed my sleeve and begged with a voice that sounded like it had been broken and put back together the wrong way. Please, she said, say you'll help, tell them you'll take care of them. Her hands shook and there was mud under her nails from whatever life had scraped her through. I tried to feel for the old woman who once made pancakes and read bedtime stories, but the woman who stood in front of me was different, and I had spent 9 years keeping everyone above water while she drifted. I told her I couldn't keep being her unpaid parent. I told her I had to look after myself, and that saying yes just to stop them from leaving would be a lie that killed me slowly. The workers moved quick after that. They packed 2 small backpacks neatly and without fanfare, folding a favorite hoodie, a couple of books, a comfort toy. My sister clutched a stuffed animal and my brother pressed his forehead to the glass like he couldn't believe the night had come. My mother reached for the car and screamed my name in a way that made my ears ring. I stepped back so she couldn't reach, because if I had gone closer she might have ripped the door open and it could have turned ugly. The kids slid into the black SUV in silence, faces flat against the window like they were trying to press the moment back inside the glass where they could reach it later. When the vehicle pulled away, my chest felt emptied, like someone had taken out a part of me and left a hollow space. For a moment the house was too loud with the echo of tires and my mother's sobbing, the sound of someone who finally felt the weight of the world. I packed a small bag in 5 minutes, the things I thought I might need if I didn't come back that night. I had already arranged to stay with a friend, so I didn't have to think too long about where to go. Leaving felt like deserting and like saving myself at the same time. I took one last look at the hallway where my sister hung pictures she'd colored. at the dented toaster that had burned my pancakes more nights than I can count, and shut the door with my key under the plant so she would not think I left without a trace. My mother called nonstop for days. The phone buzzed with her name until I silenced it and then buzzed again until I turned it off. 1 hour she was accusing me of being dramatic and selfish, of trying to ruin her life. The next hour she was pleading, begging me to come home, come fix it, come tell the social workers it had been a mistake. She showed up at my friend's house once unannounced, standing on the porch like a storm cloud demanding shelter. My friend had to ask me to talk to her because she wouldn't leave, yelling through a closed door that I had torn my family apart. I told my friend to call the police if she returned because the situation was spinning out and I couldn't be the buffer anymore. Calls turned into texts. She alternated between shame and fury, sending screenshots of messages she said she had sent to employers to explain herself, and then calling me to beg for help with paperwork she refused to learn how to do. I felt like I had been pulled into two different lives at once, the life I was trying to build for myself and the one I had left like a battlefield behind. Every time my phone lit up with her name, my hands clenched. I started keeping the phone face down and on silent because I couldn't answer every accusation and every plea without losing the thin ground I'd gained. Friends and school staff checked on me, offering rides, meals, and a couch to crash on. I accepted what I needed and refused what would drag me back. Some people called me brave, others whispered that I was cold. I felt both and neither. Inside, I was learning that boundaries have costs and that costs don't make you a monster. I knew my mother's crying wasn't just about losing custody, it was about facing responsibility for the first time in years. The calls kept coming, and I let most of them go to voicemail, listening later to the jagged mix of blame and pleading, and trying to answer with a voice that was steady enough to mean what it said. The courthouse smelled like floor polish and old paper, and I sat on a hard bench feeling like someone who had been dragged into an adult story where the lines were written in small print. The judge called the case, and we filed into a bright room with high windows that made everything look smaller somehow. I held the folder with the photos I'd taken in my phone, the copies the social worker had printed out, and the agreement my mother had forced me to sign. My palms were slick, and I kept rubbing them on my jeans like that could calm my nerves. The social worker walked through the photos on a big screen, the moldy container in the fridge, the green fuzz on dishes, the black mildew in the bathroom, trash bags busted open in the corner. Each picture had a caption with dates and the room it came from. The judge looked from the screen to my mother with a face that meant business and expected answers. I watched my mother struggle like someone was asking her to spell words she'd never learned. When the judge asked her about their doctors, their allergies, and their teachers' names, she fumbled and then gave answers that were wrong or blank. The words fell out of her mouth like someone passing a note they didn't understand. I sat there and felt every year I'd held things steady pressed through me like a timeline. I remembered calling the pediatrician for appointments, waiting on hold for school counselors, filling forms for sports and immunizations. I had done the invisible work of a parent while my mother drifted in and out like a bad season. Listening to the judge ask her simple, necessary questions made something in me ache and then harden. It wasn't just about cleanliness, it was about capacity. Could she meet the basic needs of her kids? The court needed to know. The judge read from the report the social worker had written, and the words sounded like they were being chopped into pieces so everyone could understand. He said the living conditions and parental neglect created an immediate risk and ordered that the foster placements continue while the case moved forward. He explained the steps my mother would have to take to get the kids back: a 14-week parenting program, mandatory therapy, and several unscheduled home inspections to prove she could maintain a safe environment. The judge spoke with a quiet authority that made the courtroom feel like a place where heavy things were made real. My mother tried to explain herself, to say that she loved her kids and that she would change, but every time she opened her mouth, the judge asked for specifics and she came up short. He wanted names of doctors, recent dates of visits, the school counselor's email, what their bedtimes were, how meals were planned. She couldn't answer with the detail that counts. I could see her face go pale like someone who had been revealed to be less than she claimed. The judge leaned forward and said, "We need proof you can parent safely and consistently." It was simple and blunt, and it left no room for excuses. After the hearing, the social worker handed me a pamphlet about support groups and young carers programs. She was practical, not cruel. She said the foster homes would provide structure the kids had never had: scheduled bedtimes, school support, therapy sessions, and regular meals at normal times. It felt strange to hear positive things about strangers providing what I had been doing. And yet it gave me a small, odd relief that my siblings would be fed and have clean sheets and someone to remind them about tests without it being on me. A week later, my mother lost her job. HR filed notes about repeated tardiness and unexplained absences and terminated her for failure to meet attendance standards. She called me in a raw voice that wavered between anger and panic, saying the job had been the only reliable thing. Losing it made everything harder for her case and made the path to reunification steeper. I wanted to say I was sorry, but the sentence felt empty because the reality had been building long before the termination. The loss was another consequence of a life that hadn't been managed. Meanwhile, the kids were placed in foster homes that felt like opposite worlds. Clean sheets, dinner at 6, backpacks ready for school mornings, and a calendar pinned with therapy dates and homework times. My sister texted me later saying her foster mom reminded her to brush her teeth and sat with her while she did math. My brother sent a picture of a soccer field where he practiced without missing workouts. These small, boring routines felt huge to me because each one was something I'd been enforcing for years, and now someone else was doing it without complaint. Sitting in the courthouse had taught me that the law cares about specific facts and steady proof. It rewards demonstrated change more than promises. The orders the judge made were strict because children needed stability, and stability couldn't be built on shaky words. I left the courthouse knowing the road ahead would be long, that my mother would have to do real work to meet the court's demands, and that my siblings were in a place where basic needs were met. It felt like survival, but it didn't erase the grief of what was lost when help wasn't given sooner. I walked back to my friend's apartment carrying both relief and a hollow ache, relief that the kids were safe, ache for the years I had given up, and the strange realization that starting my life could finally begin while the court watched over theirs. I started picking up extra shifts at the bookstore because it paid steady, and because being around books felt less messy than being around my family's problems. I shelved hardcovers and learned the names of regulars who liked the same authors as me, and those small routines steadied me. Working more hours let me save a little money for my own life, rent, a bus pass, a laptop for applications, and it felt like building a wall one brick at a time. I told myself I wasn't running away, I was making a foundation. I joined a support group for people who'd been parentified as kids, and the first meeting felt like stepping into a room where everyone else wore shoes that fit the same way mine did. We traded stories about doing homework after midnight, about cooking dinners when our parents couldn't, and about the weird guilt that comes with finally taking space for yourself. You can be selfish and surviving at the same time, one woman said, and I repeated that sentence in my head for weeks like a new prayer. Talking made things less lonely and taught me small tools for boundaries I hadn't known how to hold before. Applying for college felt like giving myself permission to plan a future outside the house. I filled out forms with the careful focus of someone used to checking boxes for other people, and I sent essays about wanting to study writing because stories had saved me more than once. I applied for financial aid and a scholarship, and the night I got accepted I sat on my friend's couch and cried because it felt unreal that something for me was real. I still worked nights at the bookstore and went to classes online, and every acceptance email made the idea of a future without constant caregiving feel more possible. My sister and my brother had a different kind of hard. At first, foster care felt like punishment to them. "You have to be in bed by 9, said the foster mom, and my brother sneered like he'd been told a gross joke. Chores were enforced the way I had enforced them for years, and they grumbled at rules that felt like chains instead of help. The first nights were lonely for all of us, and the letters were jagged and full of small hates and the kind of blame you aim at the only person who set limits. "You left us," my sister wrote once, and the line hit me like a thrown stone. But routine works quietly. After a few weeks, the foster mom taught my sister how to use the washing machine and where to sort colors, and my sister started sending me photos of clean socks folded the way she liked them. My brother learned how to set an alarm and how to cook a simple meal without burning something, and he started showing up on time for his after-school job. They had access to counseling where they could name the anger and the grief, and they met other kids who were learning to do things they'd never had to do. I watched their messages change from anger to small, practical updates, and each message felt like a stitch closing a seam. I kept visiting when the visits were allowed and wrote notes with practical things. Doctors' numbers, login info for school accounts, passwords because I'd been guarding that weird catalog of logistics for so long. I also texted when they needed someone to vent to, which they did at first in bursts of fury and later in quieter check-ins. Their growth wasn't linear. There were bad days when they called me crying about rules or missing old routines. Still, over time, chores became skills, and skills slowly turned into independence. My mother went to court-ordered parenting classes and therapy, and at first it was like watching someone sit through a manual for a life they had ignored. She showed up with folded hands and a face I didn't quite recognize at first. She learned how to plan meals, write a simple grocery list, and make an appointment and show up on time. The first home inspection failed, she missed a step and the inspector left a note, but she didn't give up. She kept going back to class and trying, and each small victory stacked. After a while, an inspector walked in and nodded instead of shaking her head, and that felt like a real thing, change that others could see. Supervised visits started as short lunches in a brightly lit room with a worker in the corner taking notes. My mother sat awkward and tried too hard to be perfect. "I'm sorry," she'd say, and I could tell the apology wasn't new, but maybe it was becoming honest. The visits got longer, then became weekend stays when the court saw steady proof of improvements and clean home checks. Seeing the kids come home for weekends was both strange and hopeful, a test run for family life, with adults watching the seams. I kept going to my support group and to class and to the bookstore, learning how to be a person who gets to plan a future. I learned that wanting a life of my own didn't erase love or responsibility, it just shifted how I could help without burning out. Watching my siblings pick up skills and watching my mother do the work to get them back felt like watching a slow repair. It didn't fix everything overnight, but it proved that people can change when the right pressure and the right help meet them. The house at my aunt's that night smelled like something I hadn't noticed in years: garlic and onions and a steady, normal dinner that didn't require negotiation. I sat at the kitchen table and watched my sister move a plate toward me like it was the most natural thing, like there was no long list of things that led to this moment. My chest felt full and hollow at the same time because everything that had happened to get us here was still sitting between us, heavy and unavoidable. I kept my hands folded because I wasn't ready to fumble the small piece we had. When she slid the bracelet across the table, my hand shook a little, but I took it. The letters were small and a little uneven, maybe made by someone learning to be careful, and they spelled sister. She looked at me with eyes that were almost too old for her face and said, "I'm sorry." The hug she gave was awkward at first, like we were both relearning the motion, but it settled into something honest. I felt something loosen inside me that I had tied into knots for years. I told her it was okay and hugged her back, and for a second the past didn't feel like a trap but a story we were both inside. My brother sat across from us with his fork halfway to his mouth, doing that thing guys do when they can't make their feelings into words. He looked down and mumbled, "Thanks," like it cost him something to say. I could tell from the way his shoulders eased that the sentence meant more than the word. He had learned to say small things that didn't come with strings attached, and that was enough for me in that moment. The way he glanced at our mother, and then at me, felt like a short, quiet forgiveness you give when you want things to keep moving. My mother was on the porch, hands wrapped around a mug because she couldn't find the right words for what she'd lost. When she came inside, she sat beside me and finally said the thing that had been hiding behind her excuses for years. "I took 9 years of your childhood," she said quietly, like someone admitting a crime in a room where no one would shout. Her voice broke and she looked older than the calendar said she should. "I'm so sorry," she said. The apology landed like a stone. It didn't undo the erosion, but it was the first steady thing she'd offered without twisting it into blame. I told her I heard her and that I couldn't let her erase what happened, because 9 years isn't something you can give back. "You have to keep doing the work," I said, and she nodded. She talked about the parenting classes and therapy she'd been going to, about the lists she'd been taught to make, and the way she learned to plan meals and set alarms. It felt strange to accept an apology and still set boundaries, but I had learned that forgiving didn't mean forgetting or letting old patterns creep back in. We talked for a long time in that kitchen, not the loud kind of talk that tries to fix everything in one night, but the slow kind that builds small trust. My aunt refilled our plates and laughed about something small that made my sister smile without reservations. The kids compared schedules, my sister's school calendar and my brother's job shifts, and it felt like we were trying on a version of family that had rules and time slots and the boring, steady things that make life manageable. I told them about the scholarship and the campus tour and how surreal it felt to pick classes for my own future. Getting the news had been like someone opening a door I'd only dreamed about. My sister's eyes lit up and my brother tried to act like he didn't care, but they both said they'd visit. My mother said she was proud, and I could see that she meant it the way people mean hard things after they've worked for them. She didn't say anything about the past to make herself look better. She just listened and smiled like someone who had learned what encouragement looked like. Packing for college was harder than I thought it would be. I folded shirts and textbooks into a suitcase, and every item I touched had a sliver of memory attached. Leaving felt like stepping off a cliff that had a rope tied around one ankle, safer than falling, but heavy all the same. I told myself I was not abandoning them. I repeated that to myself until the words stopped sounding like defenses and started sounding like truth. I had spent years holding them up, and now I needed to build something I could stand on, not just a bridge to pull people across. On the day I left, my sister hugged me again and the bracelet clinked against my wrist. My brother gave me a clumsy fist bump that turned into a real hug for a second. My mother handed me a list of numbers and a folded note that said, "Call if you need to come home." The note felt like a test and a promise both. I drove away with the car half-packed and my heart nodded, thinking about the scars that would always be there and the hope that maybe, with time and work, those scars would be the seams that kept us together rather than the cracks that split us apart. I got to campus and unloaded boxes into a dorm room that smelled like new carpet and possibility. I sat on the edge of the bed and ran my fingers over the bracelet until the letters blurred and then steadied. I had both weight and lift in me, the weight of what I had lost and the lift of what I might become. I knew the climb back to a healthy family would be slow and imperfect, but for the first time in years, I felt like I had permission to build my life. And that was something they had finally given me without demanding. I burned myself down to do it.